Harrison Okene was a cook, a simple job on a tugboat named the Gascon 4. He spent his days in the galley, preparing meals for the crew, a routine that felt as steady and predictable as the ocean tides on a calm day. The Gascon 4 wasn't a fancy ship. It was a workhorse, a utility vessel, designed to tow things, anchor oil rigs, and generally do the heavy lifting in the offshore oil industry. Most of its operations happened off the coast of Nigeria, in the deep, dark waters that held so much of the world's energy. For Okene, it was just work, a way to provide for his family, a familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and the constant hum of the ship's engines beneath his feet. May of 2013 started like any other month. The Gascon 4 was out at sea, carrying out its duties. The weather had been calm, a peaceful stretch of ocean that lulled everyone into a sense of security. But the sea is fickle, and conditions can change in an instant. The crew, experienced sailors, started to notice the subtle signs. The wind picked up. The waves grew a little taller, a little choppier. It wasn't a full-blown storm yet, but there was a feeling, a tension in the air, that something was brewing. They knew what a bad storm could mean out there, miles from shore, in waters deep enough to swallow ships whole. Then it hit. It wasn't a gradual worsening. It was sudden, violent. The ship didn't just rock or sway. It was thrown. One moment Okene was in the galley, probably preparing dinner. The next, the world turned upside down. The Gascon 4 capsized with terrifying speed. It wasn't a slow tilt. It was an abrupt, brutal flip. Water rushed in, not trickling, but bursting through every opening, a powerful, cold force that dragged everything with it. Okene was caught off guard, instantly submerged in the churning chaos. The galley, his familiar workspace, became a death trap of flying pots, pans, and furniture, all swirling in the dark, invading water. He felt the immense pressure, the crushing weight of the ocean as the vessel plummeted. It was a nightmare unfolding in real time, a violent descent into the abyss, and he was right in the middle of it. The speed of the sinking was what truly shocked him. One moment a working ship, the next a rapidly sinking coffin. His survival instincts kicked in, raw and urgent. In the pitch black, disoriented and struggling against the powerful currents inside the ship, he fought for air. He knew, somehow, he had to find an air pocket. He thrashed, pushing through debris that scraped and cut him, feeling his way through the submerged corridors. The water was frigid, making his muscles seize, but the primal need to breathe fueled him. He swam, or rather, clawed his way deeper into the wreck, away from the initial impact, hoping to find some small space where air might still be trapped. The ship was groaning, metal twisting and tearing, a symphony of destruction that echoed in the dark water. He finally found it, a tiny enclosed space, probably a bathroom or a small storage room, where the water hadn't completely filled. He pulled himself into it, gasping, coughing, his lungs burning. The air pocket was barely big enough for him to sit upright. It was utterly dark, the kind of darkness that presses in on you, that feels heavy and suffocating. The cold water reached his chest, chilling him to the bone. He was trapped utterly and completely. The chilling realization hit him like another wave. He was at the bottom of the ocean, inside a sunken ship. He could hear it, the ship settling, groaning, creaking under the immense pressure of the deep. Water sloshed around him with every slight movement of the wreck, a constant mocking reminder of his situation. The psychological impact was immediate and overwhelming. Fear, pure and unadulterated, seized him. Panic threatened to take over, to make him scream, to make him thrash wildly, wasting precious energy and air. He was alone, isolated, cut off from everything and everyone. There was no light, no sound from the outside world, no human contact. Just him, the cold, the dark, and the terrifying silence of the deep. He felt a crushing sense of hopelessness, a feeling that this was it, that his time was up. But even in that moment, something deep inside him refused to give up, a tiny spark of defiance against the inevitable. His survival instincts kicked in, raw and urgent. In the pitch black, disoriented and struggling against the powerful currents inside the ship, he fought for air. He knew somehow he had to find an air pocket. He thrashed, pushing through debris that scraped and cut him, feeling his way through the submerged corridors. The water was frigid, making his muscles seize, but the primal need to breathe fueled him. He swam, or rather, clawed his way deeper into the wreck, away from the initial impact, hoping to find some small space where air might still be trapped. The ship was groaning, metal twisting and tearing, a symphony of destruction that echoed in the dark water. He finally found it, a tiny enclosed space, probably a bathroom or a small storage room, where the water hadn't completely filled. He pulled himself into it, gasping, coughing, his lungs burning. The air pocket was barely big enough for him to sit upright. It was utterly dark, the kind of darkness that presses in on you, that feels heavy and suffocating. The cold water reached his chest, chilling him to the bone. He was trapped, utterly and completely. The chilling realization hit him like another wave. He was at the bottom of the ocean, inside a sunken ship. He could hear it, the ship settling, groaning, creaking under the immense pressure of the deep. Water sloshed around him with every slight movement of the wreck, a constant mocking reminder of his situation. The psychological impact was immediate and overwhelming. Fear, pure and unadulterated, seized him. Panic threatened to take over, to make him scream, to make him thrash wildly, wasting precious energy and air. He was alone, isolated, cut off from everything and everyone. There was no light, no sound from the outside world, no human contact, just him, the cold, the dark, and the terrifying silence of the deep. He felt a crushing sense of hopelessness, a feeling that this was it, that his time was up. But even in that moment, something deep inside him refused to give up, a tiny spark of defiance against the inevitable. He was in a small room, maybe a toilet or a storage closet. The ceiling was now the floor, and the floor was now the ceiling, if you could even call it that in the darkness. Water filled the space up to his chest, making every breath a struggle against the cold and the unknown. He could feel the pressure on his eardrums, a constant reminder of the incredible depth he was at. The air was thick, heavy, tasting metallic and stale. He knew it wouldn't last forever. Every breath he took was depleting the precious oxygen, filling the tiny space with carbon dioxide. The sounds were the worst part, after the darkness. The ship was alive with noise, but not the good kind. It moaned and shrieked, metal twisting on metal, the constant drip, drip, drip of water finding new ways in. Sometimes there would be a loud bang, a shudder that ran through the entire wreck, making him jump, making him fear that the whole thing was about to collapse around him. He imagined the vast black ocean outside, pressing in, ready to crush the ship and him with it. He tried to ignore the sounds, to focus on his breathing, to keep calm. But the fear was a living thing, a cold knot in his stomach. Being completely alone, submerged in darkness, played tricks on his mind. He started to hear things that weren't there, or maybe they were. Whispers, distant shouts, the clang of tools. He knew it was probably just his mind, desperate for human contact, for a sign that he wasn't completely forgotten. But the silence that followed these phantom sounds was even worse. A deep, heavy silence that spoke of absolute solitude. He reached out his hands in the darkness, feeling the cold, rough metal walls, the debris floating in the water around him. There was nothing to hold on to, no comfort, just the hard, unyielding reality of his prison. He thought about his family, his wife, his children. What would they think? Would they know what happened? Would they ever find him? These thoughts brought a fresh wave of despair, a raw, aching pain that was almost worse than the physical cold. He tried to push them away, to focus on the immediate task of surviving, but they kept creeping back, little knives twisting in his gut. The hopelessness was a heavy blanket, threatening to smother that tiny spark of defiance he had found earlier. He had to fight it, he knew. He had to keep thinking, keep breathing, keep believing that someone would come, even though every logical part of his brain screamed that it was impossible. He was in an iron box, deep beneath the ocean, and no one even knew he was alive. He knew the air in his small space wouldn't last forever. Every breath he took felt like it was stealing from a finite, quickly shrinking supply. He tried to breathe shallowly, slowly, to make each gulp of air count. He imagined the carbon dioxide building up, a silent, invisible killer that would eventually replace the oxygen he so desperately needed. It was a constant, low-level anxiety, always there, always reminding him of his precarious situation. He tried to focus on his own breathing, to regulate it, to trick his body into needing less. It was a tiring mental exercise, adding another layer of exhaustion to his already strained state. The cold was relentless. The water, up to his chest, was freezing, chilling him to the bone. He shivered uncontrollably at first, his teeth chattering so hard his jaw ached. Then, as the hours passed, the shivering became less violent, replaced by a deep, internal cold that felt like it was seeping into his very core. His fingers and toes felt numb, heavy. He worried about hypothermia, about his body simply giving up. He tried to move, to rub his arms, to create some friction, some warmth, but the small space made it hard. Every movement was slow, deliberate, a struggle against the cold water and the heavy darkness. He hugged himself, trying to conserve what little body heat he had left. It felt like he was slowly turning into ice. His mind, despite the physical discomfort and the crushing fear, kept working. He thought about his wife, his children, their faces clear in his mind's eye. He pictured their smiles, their laughter. He remembered specific moments, small everyday things that now felt incredibly precious. These memories were a lifeline, a way to keep himself tethered to the world outside, to a life he desperately wanted to return to. He found himself praying, not just for rescue, but for strength, for the ability to endure. He wasn't a particularly religious man, but in that dark, cold tomb he found himself reaching out, whispering words he hadn't spoken in years. It was a desperate plea, a raw, honest conversation with something beyond himself. The internal struggle was immense. One part of him wanted to give up, to simply let the cold and the darkness take over. It would be easier, he thought. No more fear, no more pain. But then another part, stronger, more stubborn, would push back. It was the thought of his family, the sheer injustice of dying like this, alone, in the dark, without a fight. He pictured his children growing up without him, his wife left alone. That image fueled a fire inside him, a fierce determination to keep going, no matter how impossible it seemed. He had to be strong for them, even if they didn't know he was fighting. He tried to keep track of time, but it was impossible. The darkness was absolute, a thick blanket that never lifted. He estimated hours by his hunger pangs, by the growing ache in his muscles, by the increasing cold. Was it day? Was it night? He had no idea. The concept of time seemed to lose all meaning in his watery prison. He just knew he was still there, still breathing, still fighting. Every time he felt a wave of despair wash over him, he would force himself to think of something else, a happy memory, a future plan, anything to pull himself back from the edge. It was a constant battle, a tug-of-war between hope and despair, played out in the dark, cold silence of the sunken ship. He was losing strength, but he refused to lose his mind. He clung to the idea that someone would eventually come, even as the logical part of him said it was a foolish hope. He needed that hope, though, to keep the darkness from consuming him entirely. He was Harrison Okene, and he was still alive. The fight for air and sanity was one thing, but a new, more insidious enemy began to surface. Thirst. Hours turned into what felt like days, and the constant cold, coupled with the lack of any fluid intake, started to take a brutal toll on Harrison's body. His mouth felt like sandpaper, his tongue thick and swollen. Every swallow was a painful effort, and the idea of moisture, any moisture, became an obsession. He could feel his energy draining away, his movements becoming even more sluggish. His head throbbed, and a dull ache settled behind his eyes. He knew with a chilling certainty that he couldn't last much longer without water. Dehydration was a silent killer, more certain than the cold or the darkness. He scanned his tiny waterlogged sanctuary. There was nothing, no stray bottle, no condensation he could lick from the metal. The ocean surrounded him, an endless supply of water he couldn't drink. It was a cruel irony. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push away the desperate craving, but it was relentless. His body was crying out for water, and his mind was starting to unravel under the pressure. He tried to ignore it, to focus on his breathing, on the faint hope of rescue, but the thirst was too powerful to push aside. It consumed his thoughts, gnawed at his resolve. Then, a thought, ugly and desperate, wormed its way into his mind. It was a thought he immediately recoiled from, a concept so repulsive it made his stomach churn. Drinking his own urine. The idea was vile, disgusting, something he had only heard about in extreme survival stories, stories he never imagined would become his own reality. His initial reaction was pure revulsion. No, he couldn't do that. He absolutely could not. It went against everything he knew, everything decent. It was an act of ultimate desperation, a surrender to the most primal, animalistic urge for survival. He debated with himself, a silent internal war waged in the dark. His dignity screamed no, his body screamed yes. He tasted the metallic tang of fear and despair in his parched mouth. He thought about his family again, about the pain he would cause them if he simply gave up now. Was his dignity worth dying for? Was his revulsion stronger than his will to live? The answer, slow and agonizing, began to form. No, nothing was stronger than his will to live, to see his family again. The choice, though unthinkable only hours before, was becoming clear. It was a last resort, a line he never imagined crossing, but he was at the edge and there was nowhere else to go. With a heavy heart and a profound sense of grim determination, he made the decision. It was humiliating, a deep cut to his pride, but necessary. He moved carefully in the cramped space, trying to make the act as quick and private as possible, even though he was utterly alone. The first swallow was a struggle, a battle against his own gag reflex, against the ingrained societal taboo. It tasted exactly as bad as he expected, warm and salty and foul. He forced it down, one painful gulp after another. Each swallow was a testament to his desperation, a stark reminder of how far he had fallen, how close to the edge he truly was. It wasn't a pleasant experience, not by any stretch of the imagination. But as the liquid moved through his parched throat, a tiny, almost imperceptible sense of relief spread through his body. It was temporary, a mere drop in the ocean of his thirst, but it was something. It was enough to keep him from completely shutting down. This act, born of pure survival instinct, marked a turning point. He had crossed a threshold, pushed past a boundary he thought unbreakable. He had done the unthinkable and he was still alive. The humiliation was immense, but so was the fierce, burning desire to survive. He had made a choice, a desperate, ugly choice, and now he had to live with it literally. This was his new reality, a grim testament to the lengths a human being would go to cling to life. He had taken a step further into the abyss of survival, armed only with raw instinct and an unbreakable will. The initial relief from that desperate act was fleeting. Time inside the wreck lost all meaning. There was no sun to mark the days, no stars to chart the nights, just an endless, suffocating darkness, broken only by the faint glow of his internal struggle. He couldn't tell if an hour had passed, or a day, or even longer. The monotony was a heavy blanket, pressing down on him, threatening to smother the last sparks of his sanity. The silence was almost worse than the noise of the sinking. It was a deep, oppressive silence, occasionally punctuated by the creaks and groans of the ship around him, sounds that echoed like distant thunder in his small, water-filled chamber. His mind, already weakened by oxygen deprivation and severe dehydration, began to play tricks on him. He would see things in the pitch black, fleeting shapes that danced at the edges of his vision. He heard voices sometimes, faint whispers that seemed to call his name, or fragments of conversations he couldn't quite grasp. Were they memories, or was his brain simply inventing company to cope with the crushing isolation? He couldn't tell anymore. The line between what was real and what was imagined blurred and twisted, making it hard to trust his own perceptions. He felt like he was floating in a dream, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. His family would appear before him, their faces clear as day, only to vanish when he tried to reach out. He knew it wasn't real, but the longing for them was a physical ache. Then came the other inhabitants of his watery prison. At first it was just a brushing sensation against his legs, something he initially dismissed as debris. But then he saw them, or rather felt them, fish, small dark shapes darting through the cold water around him. They were drawn to the wreck, to whatever organic matter might be present. In the absolute darkness, these encounters were unsettling. He couldn't see them clearly, but he could feel their slick bodies, sometimes bumping into him as they navigated their new environment. It was a stark reminder of where he was, deep underwater, part of a world he was never meant to inhabit. He was an intruder in their domain, a temporary resident in a tomb. The thought of them swimming so close in such an enclosed space added another layer of discomfort to his already dire situation. He wondered if they were scavengers, drawn by the scent of death that must surely permeate the sunken vessel. He tried to ignore them, to focus on the faint metallic taste of his own breath, on the slow, deliberate rhythm of his heart. But they were there, constant, silent companions in his ordeal. He was no longer alone, but the company wasn't comforting. It was a chilling affirmation of his predicament, a vivid, living connection to the deep, dark ocean that held him captive. Each passing moment was a struggle. His body was weakening, his muscles aching from the cold and lack of movement. His skin was perpetually wet, pruned and raw. The air, thin and stale, made every breath an effort. He coughed sometimes, a dry, rattling sound that echoed in the tiny space. He felt the cold seep into his bones, a constant gnawing chill that never truly left him. The hallucinations grew more vivid, more insistent. He saw strange lights, heard distant music, felt the presence of people who weren't there. He knew his mind was failing him, but he couldn't stop it. He just had to keep breathing, keep pushing through the darkness, one agonizing moment at a time. He was a prisoner of the deep, a ghost in a metal coffin, clinging to a thread of life that felt thinner with every passing endless hour. Then, one day, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden change, but a subtle, almost imperceptible difference in the oppressive silence. He heard something, a faint, distant thumping. For a moment, he thought it was just another trick of his mind, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the stale air. He held his breath, straining his ears, trying to sort out if the sound was real or imagined. The thumping came again, a rhythmic mechanical noise that was utterly alien to the creaking and groaning of the sinking ship. It was too regular, too distinct to be a random sound. It sounded like machinery, like something working, moving. He couldn't place it at first. His mind had been so used to the silence, broken only by his own ragged breathing and the unsettling movements of the fish. This new sound was different. It was external, coming from outside his watery tomb. Hope, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to truly embrace for what felt like an eternity, flickered weakly within him. Could it be? Could someone be out there? He tried to call out, but his voice was a mere croak, swallowed by the water and the vast darkness. He pressed his ear against the cold metal wall, trying to get closer to the source of the sound. It grew a little louder, a little clearer. It was definitely machinery, a dull, powerful hum. What he didn't know was that a specialized salvage team had finally arrived. Their mission was grim: recover the bodies of the crew from the capsized Gascon 4. They were a professional crew, used to the dangers and the heartbreaking realities of deep-sea recovery. For them, it was a routine, albeit somber task. They expected to find only the deceased, trapped within the wreck. They had divers in the water, methodically searching through the sunken vessel, moving through the dark, debris-filled corridors with practiced efficiency. Each diver had a specific area to cover, a grid to follow, carefully documenting everything they found. One of these divers, a South African named Nico van Heerden, was making his way through a particularly challenging section of the ship. The visibility was poor, and the currents within the wreck made movement difficult. He was shining his powerful underwater flashlight into every nook and cranny, looking for any sign of the missing crew members. His beam cut through the murky water, illuminating broken pipes, twisted metal, and floating debris. He was focused on his task, moving slowly, deliberately, his mind on the grim duty at hand. As he swept his light across a dark, enclosed space, he saw it, a hand. It was pale, almost ghostly in the beam of his light. His heart sank, a familiar feeling in this line of work. Another one. He moved closer, ready to confirm his finding, ready to mark the location for recovery. But as his light settled on the hand, something unexpected happened. The fingers twitched. Nico froze. He thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, that the darkness and the pressure were making him imagine things. He blinked, shook his head slightly and focused his light again. The hand moved. It was subtle, a slow, almost involuntary movement, but it was unmistakably alive. A surge of disbelief, followed by a jolt of adrenaline, shot through him. This was impossible. No one could have survived this long, not down here, not in these conditions. He quickly adjusted his light, sweeping it up from the hand to reveal an arm, then a shoulder, and finally a face. Harrison Okene, barely conscious, his eyes wide and unfocused, stared back at him. Nico's mind raced. This wasn't a body recovery. It was a rescue. A living person. After 3 days. He quickly signaled his discovery to the surface, his voice muffled but urgent through his communication system. "There's a survivor! There's a survivor!" The news spread like wildfire through the salvage crew, turning their grim mission into an unexpected, exhilarating race against time. The diver, Nico, moved slowly, his disbelief still warring with the undeniable reality in front of him. He carefully extended a hand, not quite touching Okene, but close enough to show he was real, not an illusion. Through his comms he spoke, his voice a mix of awe and urgency. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" Okene, his throat raw and his voice barely a whisper, managed to croak out a sound, a faint affirmative grunt. It was enough. It was a confirmation that the man in front of him was indeed alive and responsive. Nico repeated his question, a little louder this time, trying to get a clearer response. "Are you all right? We're here to help you." Okene, still weak, tried to nod. He tried to speak again, but only a raspy sound emerged. The sheer shock of seeing another human face after so many days in the dark, coupled with his extreme dehydration and exhaustion, made coherent speech impossible. But the message was clear. He was alive, and he needed help. The communication back to the surface was buzzing with activity. The initial reports of a body recovery had been replaced by the incredible news of a live rescue. The entire salvage team, who moments ago were preparing for a somber task, were now consumed by a different kind of intensity. The challenges of rescuing someone from such depths were immense. It wasn't just about pulling Okene out of the wreck. He had been exposed to extreme pressure for days. Bringing him up too quickly would result in severe decompression sickness, often called the bends, which could be fatal. The water was still bitterly cold, and he was in a state of advanced hypothermia. Special equipment would be needed, and a precise protocol had to be followed. The team on the surface immediately began coordinating. A recompression chamber, typically used for divers who had spent too long at depth, was prepared. Medical personnel were put on standby. Every second counted, but haste could also be deadly. A second diver, a medic, was dispatched to Okene's location to assess his condition more thoroughly and to provide immediate basic support if possible while they prepared for his extraction. Nico, meanwhile, stayed with Okene, offering what comfort he could. He spoke in calm, reassuring tones, explaining what was happening even if Okene couldn't fully understand or respond. He described the plan, the recompression chamber, the medical team waiting. It was vital to keep Okene's spirits up and to prepare him mentally for the difficult process ahead. The medic diver arrived, carrying a thermal blanket and some emergency rehydration gel. They carefully wrapped Okene in the blanket, trying to raise his body temperature, and administered the gel, a small but vital step in his recovery. The extraction itself was a slow, deliberate process. Okene was gently secured in a specialized stretcher, designed to keep him stable during the ascent. The divers worked with painstaking care, guiding the stretcher through the narrow, debris-filled passages of the wreck. Each movement was calculated, each obstacle overcome with precision. The main concern was maintaining a slow, controlled ascent rate to minimize the risk of decompression sickness. As Okene slowly rose through the water, towards the faint light filtering from the surface, he could feel the pressure gradually easing. It was a strange sensation after days of constant crushing weight. When he finally broke the surface, the bright daylight was almost blinding, a stark contrast to the absolute darkness he had endured. He was immediately transferred to a waiting recompression chamber on the support vessel. The chamber was a sealed environment that simulated the pressure of the deep sea. Inside, Medical staff began the critical process of slowly bringing his body back to normal atmospheric pressure, a process that would take days. It was a delicate balance, managing his hydration, his temperature, and monitoring every vital sign. The road to full recovery would be long, but for the first time in days, Harrison Okene was safe. The recompression chamber became Harrison's world for the next 3 days. Doctors and nurses constantly monitored him, slowly adjusting the pressure, ensuring his body could safely adapt to the surface world again. His muscles ached, his skin was pale and wrinkled from the water, and his eyes struggled with the light. But he was alive. The physical recovery was a long, hard journey. He suffered from severe dehydration, hypothermia, and multiple minor injuries from the capsizing. His kidneys had taken a hit from the lack of water, and he needed specialized care to get them back to normal function. Eating solid food was a challenge at first, his stomach unaccustomed to anything but the desperate sips of seawater and his own urine. He had to relearn how to walk properly, his legs weak and unsteady after so many days in a cramped space. Beyond the physical wounds, the psychological scars ran deep. The memory of the darkness, the cold, the constant fear, and the sounds of the ocean pressing in on him haunted his sleep. He had nightmares of being trapped again, of the ship creaking and groaning as it sank. The faces of his lost crewmates, particularly those he knew well, would flash in his mind. He found himself reliving the moment the boat went down, the sudden jolt, the rush of water. Therapy became an important part of his recovery, helping him process the immense trauma he had endured. Talking about it, even though it was painful, helped him to slowly piece himself back together. The impact of his survival on Harrison's life was profound. He emerged a changed man. His perspective on life shifted dramatically. Material possessions, daily worries that once seemed important, now felt trivial. He spoke often about the power of faith, convinced that his prayers had been answered. He felt an intense connection to God, believing his survival was nothing short of a miracle. This belief became a cornerstone of his new outlook. He often said that he had faced death and returned, and that experience gave him a unique appreciation for every single moment. He couldn't go back to sea after that. The ocean, once his workplace, now held too many terrifying memories. He found peace in a life on land, valuing the simple things, the warmth of the sun, a fresh glass of water, the company of his family. His story spread across the world, a testament to human resilience. He was invited to speak at events, sharing his incredible ordeal, not for fame, but to inspire others. He wanted people to know that even in the darkest, most hopeless situations, there is always a glimmer of hope, a reason to fight. He became an advocate for safety at sea, urging for better training and equipment, hoping that no one else would ever have to go through what he did. Harrison Okene's survival was an extraordinary feat, a tale that defies belief. Trapped for nearly 3 days in an air pocket at the bottom of the ocean, he faced impossible odds. He battled hypothermia, dehydration, hallucination, and overwhelming despair. His decision to drink his own urine, a desperate act of survival, highlighted the extreme lengths to which the human spirit can be pushed. His rescue, against all expectations, captured the world's imagination. It wasn't just a story of luck, but of an unwavering will to live, of a deep-seated hope that refused to die even in the face of absolute darkness. His ordeal stands as a powerful reminder of the incredible capacity for resilience within us all, and the enduring power of hope when everything else is lost.